All right. Well, you can see that we've got wow, we've got a full house here. Just fresh off the heels, watching Fishin' Men. We've got director producers Darby Duffin, Adam Jones. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we've got fisherman Rich Burgess. So we've got a lot to talk about, gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time. First and foremost.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I don't know where to begin because this is one of those films that you almost leave having more questions in an uncomfortable way. But how about what was the impetus for this one? What was that spark that led you guys to want to tell this story?
Yeah, so it kind of the spark was about 10 years ago. It really started from a conversation that I had with a woman who was a fisherman's wife. I was living about an hour north of Boston in a coastal New England town, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And it was through that conversation that I realized, what her husband was going through as a fisherman, and just this sort of dire situation that fishermen had been dealing with, particularly with regulations along the whole New England coast in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts as well. So it was really sort of an eye-opening thing to, you just, assumed that fishing went on as normal as long as you see fish in the seafood market, and you just never think that there's an issue. It just seems like it's, one of these great historic trades. But there was a problem, and so it just sort of piqued my curiosity because I hadn't heard about it until that conversation. And then it was really just as a consumer walking into a seafood market again, same town, and expecting to see local fish. Go figure. And you could find cod from Iceland or Norway, but chances were you weren't going to find it locally caught, and you could literally see the fishing vessels behind this particular market that I'm speaking of. So that was the light bulb for me that was like, there's a story here that it was, those two those two pieces of information. I was like, wow, this is incredible. Where this local product that is supposed to be ubiquitous isn't here, or if it is, even if it was, it's more expensive than the imported fish right alongside it. So I knew there was a story there. I had put that together as a pitch, and entered into a doc film contest. It did really well. It was a great proof of concept. So I had a lot of encouragement about the idea for the story. Adam and I were both living in New Hampshire at the time. And I called him up and said, hey, come meet me for lunch. I've got this story for a doc I think you'll be really interested in. We talked for an hour or so. I pitched him the idea, and I said, what do you think about, coming aboard on this together? And he was like, yes, we got to start shooting on this thing tomorrow. So it pretty much happened like that. And about a month later, we found ourselves in Gloucester and started our shoots from there. In fact, Rich was the first guy that we interviewed, and it was that interview that we were like, wow, Rich's story is so powerful and personal. We really looked at each other and we're like, we have something here. So.
And Adam, let me ask you. You guys took a unique approach, being kind of co-captains of this. Creatively, what's that symbiotic experience like compared to how these things normally unfold?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that there's any normal to directing. Everyone has such a different path. I mean, co-directing definitely is, it was a first for me and Darby, and I think along the way, I think we knew from the get-go what our respective skill sets were best utilized for. Darby had done a touch before we even started. I'm a director of commercials and branded content by day, so I've been on film sets ever since I got out of college, and kind of working in that world. So, kind of bringing those two things together, along with resources. When you start out doing a documentary, you're calling in people and favors and trying to get things done for next to nothing, and trying to utilize pretty much every discovery along the way about like where Darby and I, like we both weren't cinematographers, but we shot over half the film ourselves. So, documentary, making a doc will really force you to look deep inside yourself and really, roll your sleeves up and get dirty and go do it with minimal resources. And, but yeah, there were definitely some moments where we knocked heads, whether it was while we were actually shooting together or creative decisions, things about the edit and there's always, things are always sort of subjective. So, but overall, I think we couldn't have done it without really being able to tag team this. We've moved houses, the two of us. It's taken 6 years to make this film, twice. So we're now, I'm in Portland, Oregon, and he's in Houston. We both started out in New England, where we could, kind of at the drop of the hat, grab our cameras and go run down to Gloucester and go shoot. But what you learn doing a doc is that about 20% of your effort and your money goes to actually capturing the footage, and 80% of your time and money will go to the post-production process. And we've definitely learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
So there's just been, I think you kind of like for Darby and I, we had to sort of figure out what our roles were constantly along the way. And it's been a real learning experience, I think, for both of us.
I want to bring in Rich into the conversation, because you can really, I think, talk about, how the trade of being a fisherman it's generational, and it's often, comes from passion, and kind of maybe more detail more of the hurdles and the challenges that you guys are still facing nowadays. It seems like there's a lot of limitations.
No, there is. The limitations are just, it's crazy right now. But I will say that I think I had brown hair when we started this document story. But it's tough because there was a lot of small boats fishing in our region, just hundreds of small boats, and now there's very few. And I was told by one of the directors of the fishery service, Andy Rosenberg, years ago that we want a big boat, large boat fishery, and that's basically what it's come down to. It's sad. There's very, very few small boats left. The big boats are doing tremendous offshore, and most of the small guys like myself have reverted back to lobstering that I started with back in the 70s. So that's pretty much where it's gone now. There's a big push on the lobster fishery because we basically have been shoved out of the groundfish fishery.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are staggering when you look at like 91% or even north of that is, what we consume here in the U.S. is, it's from elsewhere. It's just, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem
I think right now the number is 96%, but you have to understand that the more that the fishery service, the more small boats or more boats they put out of business in this region, they rely on fish coming from other countries. And the fishery service gets a tax tariff on that. They get the proceeds from the money coming into the country. It used to be, it's this Kennedy Saltonstall bill, which used to be for protection of the fishery and the fishermen of this country. And about 10 or 12 years ago, the fishery service commandeered that from the Commerce Department. So every time you buy tilapia, which is total trash fish, who knows how many percent of it, but the tariff money goes to the fishery service. And they can do whatever they want with it. Very sad.
I imagine Adam, Darby, with a film like this, you're hoping that it could impact and inspire to the point where we could see a slight change of direction with the laws. I mean, is that something that even people that have seen the film already, that you've kind of started a fire, hopefully?
Yeah, we get asked that question, and there's several policies that have been out there or a different stage of the legislative process that could probably make a difference. I mean, there's the country of origin label law that requires consumers to be told where the fish is from. What it doesn't tell you is how far it traveled maybe to get there. So like in the film, we tell you, oh, you might see this fish from Iceland, but what you don't know is it has 20,000 food miles on it. So there is there's definitely information that consumers should know. So in that regard, but we tried to look at some of the things that we could, as filmmakers, find potential solutions for. And the obvious one, policy-wise, seems to be science, and maybe that's partly management or management practices, but clearly the management practice, and we tried not to beat you over the head with it too much, but to show you that these relationships have completely, dissolved into a place where it's not constructive. And, so we show you Norway, and we show you how collaborative science works there. And we really think, like, from a policy standpoint, this would be a good thing to look at, how management practices are handled there. I mean, they have an incredibly successful fishery in Norway. And, all of the voices at the table, particularly the fishermen's, seem to be heard. And that is not something that, that happens here. So that's a major one. We could go on. There's more, I think, that you could say from the consumer side, but from a policy side, I think there's a lot to be done.
There's along those lines. I think one of the learning curves that Darby and I had to really think about and internalize is that like a desired outcome is not necessarily a story. You know what I mean? And so if the desired outcome is to change people's behavior and maybe even move the needle and change policy, what we, I think, really did was turn the lens, or turn the attention, turn the responsibility back to the viewer, the consumer, and say that you have the power in the choices that you make when you're at a retail point or when you're at a restaurant, that you should ask more questions and that you should make better choices. And did I freeze?
And it's interesting,
so
is I
can't
feel
tell
like
if I'm frozen or not.
no, you're good. It's interesting because the consumer, it seems, in the past 5, 6, 7 years, has made concerted efforts to make those adjustments, whether it be the way that they're accessing their beef or their milk, their vegetables, trying to make it local, sustainable. And you would think that with fish, it makes just as much sense. I know, like this year with the film fest here, we're partnering with Real Good Fish, and they're all about, locally sourced, even telling you in terms of labeling what tackle the fish was caught on. It's a pretty cool concept. I know Alan Lovewell will be on the panel on Ocean Day here at the ranch and talking about that. But you bring up a great point. The onus definitely needs to be focused on how we're consuming and when we're consuming it. The fact that we think we can have any fish at any time of the year.
The demand is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I make a point about? I make a point about the discards? Quite a few years ago in Gloucester here, we had a meeting with the politicians, and when this whole thing started about, too many fish being discarded, you're only allowed to, at one point, we were only allowed to bring in, I think, 20 pounds of codfish a day, which is absurd. And we got together with the politicians and we said, let's do it the right way. Instead of, throwing our dead fish overboard, let's bring the fish in, give it to the homeless, give it to the food shelters, food pantries, or whatever. Everybody was in agreement. All the fishermen wanted to do it, the whole fleet. And we can make a difference, like especially in Boston with people that have no food. And it got right down to we were basically ready to go. And the Fisheries Service law enforcement came in and said, if any fish comes in, discard into the auction houses, it'll be sold and the money will go to the law enforcement. So that just stopped right there. Very sad. It's incredibly sad what's taken place to the fishery here. We're trying to do the fishermen. We're trying to do the best we possibly can, and we're being shut down at every door.
Yeah. There is an organization called SeaShare that's out of Seattle, Washington, that actually does what Rich is talking about. They've been given the rights by the Pacific Northwest Fisheries Management Council to take the bycatch that fishermen have and donate it to local food banks. And so that's what they're doing. that seems to be, perfectly good use of bycatch, and fish, if they can't make a profit off of it, then it should at least be used, obviously, for, people that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford good, clean, healthy protein. But yeah, to your point on the consumer, and as Adam was saying, I think that unless they're even aware that there's a problem, then you have to start there. You have to raise awareness. So with the idea of hitting you with 91%, I mean, these are the things that were so striking. I know when I learned about it, I mean, to see 91% of the seafood is important, then only 1% is inspected. And then half of that's inspected is discarded because it doesn't meet our standards, our quality, regulations. That should cause you to think twice about where you're buying your fish, where it comes from, right? And so, the choice being pretty obvious that you don't have any transparency, any chain of custody or traceability with foreign imported seafood. You do with American seafood, and that it's sustainably harvested. So obviously, if you're asking where it's from, and if it's sourced in the United States, then you can trust it.
Yeah, it's an eye-opening story, and I thank you guys for exposing it and sharing it in the way that you did. So Rich Burgess, Adam Jones, Darby Duffin, thank you so much for taking the time, and I encourage everyone watching, spread the word on this film that you've just seen. Obviously, the story is just starting to get out there, and hopefully it spreads as much as it can. Thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you for having us.